Hello and welcome to the Shakespeare Podcast. In this episode, we'll be looking at the story of Othello and how the two locations of the play, Venice and Cyprus, interact. Of the 5 acts in the play Othello, Act 1 is set in Venice, whereas the other 4 acts are based in Cyprus. I'll be offering some ideas on why the location of the play changes and what dramatic advantage Shakespeare is able to gain from it. The play opens in Venice. For Shakespeare's audience, Venice is a rich cosmopolitan city, an exotic gateway between East and West, full of exciting possibilities. We open on the street. Rodrigo is complaining to Iago that he told him that Iago hates not this person, and Iago says that it's not true. For reasons we don't understand, Iago has been spending Rodrigo's money, which perhaps might lead us to suspect that Rodrigo is a gull, a fool, a patsy, a simp. Iago says that he does hate this master, quote unquote, because there was a vacancy to become lieutenant to him, and he didn't get the job. According to Iago, he should have got the job, but it went to, quote, one Michael Cassio instead. Iago points out that he's obviously the most qualified person for this job. I know my price, he tells us. And the guy who got the job is completely unqualified. Michael Cassio is a man, quote, that never set a squadron in the field, nor the division of a battle knows, and mere prattle without practice is all his soldiership. Iago says that it's not true for him. He's seen the proofs, quote unquote, as he calls it. He's seen real action in Rhodes and in Cyprus against both Christians and heathens. So what's being set up here is that Iago is the battle-hardened veteran of many wars, and Michael Cassio is a kid who has no experience or qualifications. There is a sense here that Iago is passed over for being a commoner, and that Cassio is a noble. In modern parlance, what we have here is a class distinction. Also, Iago is impressing Rodrigo with his status as a veteran who's been hard done by. And all Iago got was the job of personal assistant to, quote, his moorship, a parody of the term his lordship. Iago is only his moorship ancient or ensign. Iago says that he'll continue to follow the Moor, not out of love or duty, but to serve his own ends. He gets Rodrigo to wake up Desdemona's father to tell him that his daughter has eloped. Notice that even in the opening scene, Iago gets Rodrigo to do his dirty work for him. Once Desdemona's father, Brabantio, is up and has realised his daughter is missing, Iago exits stage left. Notice also the difference of speech in the parts of the scene between Iago and Rodrigo. When they are waking up Desdemona's father, Rodrigo does the gentlemanly thing by introducing himself and explaining the situation. Iago, on the other hand, just shouts out vulgar, racist slurs. Quote, an old black ram is tupping you a white ewe, or you'll have your daughter covered with a Barbary horse, and, quote, your daughter and the Moor are making the beast with 2 backs, and many others. These comments are all sexually related, and they're all meant to be as vulgar as possible. The rest of the scene is given over to Brabantio realising that Desdemona is gone and getting his guards together to go out and find her. In the next scene, Iago is telling Othello how he's defended his honour against anyone who'd speak ill of him. Othello says he loves Desdemona, but does not fear repercussions for marrying her because of his services that he's done to the Duke of Venice because he's descended from royalty, and of course because he's in love with her. Notice the order of the reasoning in that speech. There's then a gang of soldiers appear, which might be Brabantino's and his guards, but turns out to be Cassio, who tells Othello that the Duke needs him immediately. Othello gets ready to go. Iago tells Cassio about Othello's marriage, which is news to Cassio, and there's some trouble in Cyprus apparently, which the Duke needs sorting out. As they're about to leave, Brabantino turns up with his soldiers. It looks like there's going to be a fight, but Othello takes charge of the situation and diffuses it. Brabantio accuses Othello of witchcraft and sorcery because there's no chance that his daughter would run off with a black man. Brabantio would have Othello imprisoned, but they have both been summoned by the Duke on state business. Notice that all Iago's racist slurs and Brabantino's moral panic, the audience's first sight of Othello is of him taking charge of a delicate situation and diffusing it calmly and in an authoritative manner. Othello looks relaxed as he tells Brabantio he needs no cue to fight and no prompt, and as a general and a man of action he's used to being in charge. In scene 3, the Duke is discussing plans for war when Othello and Brabantino arrive. The Duke goes directly to Othello and only sees Brabantino afterwards. However, Brabantino wants to talk about his daughter and how Othello bewitched her with witchcraft. Othello points out he has no witchcraft, he's just an honest soldier who's used to the battlefield and, quote, who but little blessed with the soft phrases of peace, and then proceeds to speak most eloquently of how at Brabantino's house he happened to tell Desdemona about all the battles he'd fought and all the tight scrapes that he'd been in, and she fell for it, and like many women she loves a man in a uniform. To back this up, Desdemona arrives to speak to the Senate on Othello's behalf. Shakespeare gives Desdemona the speech, "I do perceive here a divided duty," with which she appears articulate, educated and confident. Brabantio accepts his daughter's decision. Othello has to go fight the war and Desdemona wants to go with him. Notice how they look like a power couple here. Othello is the man of the moment, and Desdemona is the young woman who's confident enough to stand up in the Senate and declare her love for him. What could possibly go wrong? Then Othello puts his new wife in the care of Iago, a man, quote, of honesty and trust. And as the audience, we know he's neither of those things. Brabantino tells Othello she has deceived her father and may thee. It's a line that will resonate with Othello throughout the rest of the play. And the scene in Act 1 ends where the act began, with Iago and Rodrigo. It's been mentioned earlier, but we learned that Rodrigo is really the one who wanted to marry Desdemona, and now he will go off and drown himself because of his disappointed love. Iago makes fun of his quote-unquote love and says that he can get Desdemona for Rodrigo whenever he wants. Othello will lose interest in her. She's young and she'll soon want something else. Get some money together, says Iago, and I'll help you get Desdemona. Rodrigo says he'll sell all his land and he exits. And Iago then tells us that it's widely believed that Othello has slept with his wife Emilia. He has no proof of this, but he doesn't care about that. Iago is going to get Othello to believe that Cassio has slept with Desdemona so that he can get Cassio's job. Cassio, apparently, is a player, in modern parlance, a chad, and Othello is gullible enough to believe in Iago's monstrous plan. So that's Act 1. It finishes as it started, with Iago and Rodrigo, but Iago gives us two different reasons why he hates Othello, one in scene 1 and one in scene 3, and the whole of Act 1 is set in Venice and takes place at night. Notice also that the whole of Act 5 also takes place at night. But now we move on to Act 2. It's Cyprus, it's daylight, there's a storm. It's almost like another opening to the play. We've met the characters, we've seen their backstory, and now we're ready for the main action. All that stuff about soldiers and wars, the audience must be expecting plenty of action. But as it turns out, the Turks have been destroyed by the storm, and the war is over before it's begun. Here comes Cassio, Othello still at sea, and then Iago arrives with Desdemona and Emilia. Cassio greets Emilia, and Iago is vulgar again, claiming that his wife is something of a tart. He backtracks and says, no, really, she's only a nag. But we, the audience, and Cassio and Desdemona get the message. Desdemona tries to defend her, but Iago says no. His wife is a whore, he says. Quote, you rise to play and you go to bed to work. Desdemona asks what Iago would say about her. And then, in something of a strange scene, Iago goes through a list of Elizabethan conceits about the behaviour of women. Desdemona points out that these are boring old ideas that you'd expect to find, quote, in the alehouse. In other words, they're not courtly or noble. This kind of thing is vulgar stuff. This part of the scene is concluded by Cassio, who tells us that Iago makes a better soldier than a scholar. As an aside, Iago points out that it's Cassio's mannerly courtesy that's going to get him into trouble. Trumpets, and enter Othello. We then get the reunion scene in which Othello and Desdemona are very much in love. As Othello says, "Oh, my soul's joy." And as in Act 1, they look like the perfect couple. They exit, and it's Iago and Rodrigo again, like Act 1, Scene 3, with Iago falsely claiming that Desdemona is in love with Cassio. Othello, says Iago, is lacking in, quote, loveliness in favour, sympathy in years, manners and beauties, whereas Cassio is, quote, handsome, young, and hath all the requisites in him that folly and green minds look after. Iago is going to get Rodrigo to provoke Cassio so that Iago can disgrace and discredit Cassio. Notice that Iago convincing Rodrigo that Desdemona loves Cassio is a forerunner, or a practice run if you would like, for Iago to convince Othello that Desdemona loves Cassio. After Rodrigo's exit, Iago reiterates that Othello has slept with his wife. Quote, the lusty Moor hath leapt into my seat. And Iago thinks it's right and proper to get even with Othello, quote, wife for wife. He'll get Othello to think that Desdemona is sleeping with Cassio, and Othello will thank him for it. In Scene 2, it's just the herald saying that everyone should celebrate the defeat of the Turks and Othello's marriage to Desdemona, that anything goes by order of Othello and heaven bless us all. So Scene 3 opens with Othello making sure the guard is organised before withdrawing for the night with Desdemona. Iago then appears and trades vulgar remarks with Cassio of the nature of, well, you know, that Desdemona, she's a bit of alright. Cassio does his best to deflect Iago's vulgarity, but doesn't seem surprised by it, perhaps because Iago is only a common soldier. So Iago proposes they get a few drinks, and Cassio says that he's not very good at drinking, and besides he doesn't feel very well. But Iago says that that's nonsense, the lads are here and it's party time and we're all going for a drink. This is what's known as peer pressure, and Cassio falls for it. Iago tells us of his plans to get them all drunk and then cause as much trouble between them as possible. Enter Cassio, Montano and the gentleman. They're all singing and drinking, and Cassio says he's not drunk when he plainly is. And when he exits, Iago mentions to Montano that Cassio has a drink problem. Montano says we should tell Othello, and Iago says that there's no need. But before we can discuss it any further, in comes Cassio pursuing Rodrigo. Montano tries to get between them, and Cassio attacks Montano, the governor of Cyprus, while Rodrigo, under Iago's direction, sneaks off to raise the alarm. Enter Othello, and Iago, who of course started it all to begin with, pretends to play the peacemaker. Othello wants to know what's happened. Iago pretends he doesn't want to say, but in the end, reluctantly, explains what happened to Othello fairly accurately. Cassio gets the blame, Othello disowns him. Desdemona appears, distracting Othello, and makes it worse for Cassio, that he's woken up not just his boss, but his boss's wife. They all exit, and Cassio and Iago are left alone on stage. Cassio says he's lost his reputation, and Iago says reputation is a lot of nonsense, much as he said that love was a lot of nonsense to Rodrigo in the earlier scene. He tells Cassio that he needs to pull himself together, and Cassio is remorseful and upbraids himself for drinking too much. Iago says he's being too hard on himself, and all this will be different in the morning. He tells Cassio he can win Othello back by getting Desdemona to speak on his behalf. After all, quote, our general's wife is now the general. We, the audience, know that Desdemona speaking for Cassio will only make Othello suspicious, because we know Iago's plan. Notice also that Iago preys on Cassio when Cassio is at his lowest point. Cassio thanks him for his advice, honest Iago, whilst we know that he's far from honest, and Cassio exits, having been set up to speak to Desdemona and fuel Othello's suspicion. In the soliloquy that follows, Iago directly addresses the audience with the speech, quote, and what's he then that says I play the villain? It's quite clear that Iago is the villain, but Iago says that he's giving out free advice. It's not his fault if people are gullible, if virtues can be used as vices, or if people are going to be stupid. That's not Iago's fault. But Desdemona condemns herself, and Othello will easily lose faith in her, says Iago. He's just doing what's normal, what anybody would do if they could get away with it. Enter Rodrigo, and another scene between Iago and Rodrigo, this time to end Act 2. Rodrigo has spent all his money. He's been beaten up by Cassio, and he's had enough. He's going back to Venice. Iago upbraids him for being impatient and says, yes, he took a beating from Cassio, but now Cassio is in big trouble, and tomorrow everything will seem different. Exit Rodrigo, and Iago tells us his plan, to get his wife to talk to Desdemona, and he'll speak with Othello, so that when Cassio asks for Desdemona's help, Iago will make Othello believe that Cassio and Desdemona are having an affair. Notice how much of this play depends upon the audience knowing more than the characters. We know how bad Iago is, so every time Othello or Cassio calls him honest, it reminds us just what a villain Iago really is. I hope you've enjoyed this episode on Act 1 and Act 2 of Othello, and I hope we'll see you next time on the Shakespeare Podcast.